in 1987, you walk away.
Yeah.
She took the midnight train going anywhere.
It was a combination of the passion for music had left me.
There are moments in a life that don't just hurt. They divide everything into before and after. For Steve Perry, the voice that once lifted arenas into the heavens,
Don't you know that I'm alive for you?
those moments weren't found on a stage or inside a recording booth. They happened in quiet rooms, far from the roar of the crowd. Rooms where machines hummed softly, where time felt suspended, and where the people he loved most slipped beyond his reach. For decades, the world wondered why a man with a once-in-a-generation voice walked away at the height of his power. They blamed pressure, fame, creative battles, burnout. But none of them came close to the truth. Because the truth was never about music, it was never about journey. It was never about the spotlight he abandoned. It was about two losses, separated by decades, that struck the same wound and reopened a silence he never learned to live without. And the question that has lingered ever since: how does a heart survive when it breaks in the exact same way twice? You're watching RetroWaves, where the untold stories of music finally come to light. If you're ready to hear the truth behind the moments the world never saw, let's continue. To understand the weight Steve Perry carried, you have to understand what he treasured most. It wasn't fame, applause, or even the towering success he helped build. What meant everything to him were the few people who held his heart gently, the ones he let close in a life built on distance. Steve Perry never loved easily, and he never loved casually. When he let someone in, it was absolute. And that's why the two moments that shattered him weren't career decisions or artistic frustrations. They were losses that reached deeper than any song he ever wrote. One happened when he was young and still learning how fragile life could be. The other came decades later, just when he thought he'd found the courage to love again. These weren't just moments of grief. They were the moments that rewrote him. Before the world crowned him a legend, Steve Perry was a son trying desperately to hold his world together. In the middle of a whirlwind of touring, recording, and impossible expectations, he received the call that changed everything. His mother, the person who had believed in him long before stadiums ever did, was slipping away. And suddenly, the stage lights he once chased felt unbearably bright. He left everything behind, not because he wanted to, but because he had to. He stayed by her side as the foundation of his life grew faint. The world was demanding hits, rehearsals, deadlines. But grief doesn't follow schedules. It doesn't care about chart positions. When she passed, something hollowed out inside him. The voice that had once seemed limitless now carried a tremble no one else could hear. He went back to the band, but he was no longer whole. The world saw a superstar returning to his throne. He felt like a man walking through smoke. He didn't talk about it then. He didn't have the words. All he knew was this: the first break never fully healed. And he sensed, somewhere deep inside, that life wasn't finished with him. Most of the world remembers the aftermath as a time of tension within Journey. Missed sessions, strained communication, a band trying to stay afloat, while its frontman quietly unraveled. But behind every rumor was a truth no headline captured. Steve Perry was grieving in real time, and grief rarely makes room for harmony. He tried to push forward, to bury himself in work, to pretend that music could drown out the silence his mother left behind. But grief has a way of echoing. It seeps into the smallest corners of life. It followed him into studios, backstage dressing rooms, hotel hallways, and long after-midnight drives where nothing seemed real. This was when he learned something he wouldn't admit publicly for decades. Success cannot protect you from loss. Fame doesn't numb pain. It amplifies it. When thousands of people are watching, you become an expert at pretending you're fine. But the wound stayed open. And the guilt of trying to move on, of feeling himself pulled back into music when all he wanted was more time, lingered like a shadow he couldn't outrun. He held himself together because the world expected him to. But a part of him already knew if life ever struck that same wound again, he wouldn't survive it. Decades later, long after he had stepped away from spotlights and interviews, Steve Perry found something he never thought he'd feel again: a spark of hope. He saw her in a documentary, a woman named Kellie Nash, and something in her presence reached him with surprising clarity. She wasn't a fan. She wasn't a singer. She wasn't part of his world. She was simply someone who radiated warmth in a way he hadn't felt in years. He reached out, cautiously at first, tentatively, almost apologetically. And to his astonishment, she welcomed him into her life. Their connection grew quickly, but gently, as if they both knew they were stepping into something delicate. For the first time since losing his mother, Steve Perry felt the quiet thrum of a future, a life not defined by grief, but by possibility. He allowed himself to open up, to trust, to believe that maybe after all the years of silence, he could still be capable of love. But fate has timing that borders on cruel. Just when he felt his heart stitching itself back together, the news came. Kellie's cancer had returned, and suddenly the air grew heavy with a familiar fear. The moment he heard her diagnosis, he felt himself falling into an echo, as if time had looped back to the first hospital room he never recovered from. He stayed by Kellie's side the way he once stayed by his mother's, refusing to let her face the darkness alone. But this time, something was different. This time, he wasn't just losing someone he loved. He was losing the person who taught him how to feel again. Kellie fought with a strength that didn't seem possible. Steve held on to hope, even when doctors hinted otherwise. But deep in his bones, he recognized the familiar ache. Life was preparing to take something from him again. As the illness progressed, their conversations became softer, more fragile. In one of those fragile moments, she made a request he would carry like a vow and a burden. She asked him not to disappear again. Those words pierced him deeper than the impending loss itself.
Honey, I need to ask you a favor. So what's that? If something was to ever happen to me, that you won't go back into isolation, for I feel it would make it all for naught.
Because she was asking him to do something he didn't know he could survive. And when she passed, the world didn't see it happen. There were no tabloid headlines, no public statements, no farewell tours. There was only silence, a deeper silence than before, and the same wound torn open again. In the aftermath, Steve Perry disappeared, not out of choice, but out of necessity. His voice, once so powerful, now felt impossibly heavy. Every note reminded him of her. Every melody felt like a letter he couldn't finish. He lived quietly, almost invisibly, because grief had become a second language, one he never wanted to speak but couldn't unlearn. People speculated. They blamed perfectionism, fear of failure, ego, the changing music industry. But none of it touched the truth. He didn't walk away because music abandoned him. He walked away because life had taken the two people he loved most in the same devastating way. When he finally returned years later with an album shaped by loss, he described it not as a comeback, but as a promise to Kellie, a promise he wasn't sure he could keep, but knew he had to try. Even then, when he spoke about her, something shifted in his voice, a subtle break, a tremor, the kind of pain that never truly leaves. And this was the moment the world finally understood. Steve Perry wasn't a man who retired from music. He was a man who survived grief twice and never fully healed from either. The truth he finally revealed, the one that explains everything, is that these two moments didn't just break him. They mirrored each other so perfectly that he could no longer separate the past from the present. Losing his mother had carved a hollow place inside him. Losing Kellie filled that hollow with echoes. They were two different women, two different lifetimes, two different versions of himself. But the endings were the same. The hospital room, the helplessness, the waiting, the final breath, the quiet afterward, and the unbearable realization that no amount of love could keep them here. This is what he meant when he said he never recovered. It wasn't poetic exaggeration. It wasn't an artistic metaphor. It was the truth of a man who lost his foundation and then lost his future. Both times, his voice changed. Both times, he walked away. Both times, the world searched for explanations he couldn't give. He finally explained that grief doesn't disappear. It becomes part of your voice, your rhythm, the spaces between your breaths. It shapes the way you move, the way you trust, the way you remember. And for Steve Perry, those two moments weren't chapters. They were anchors, anchors that held him in place long after the rest of the world moved on. In the years since, Steve Perry has learned to live beside his grief, not beyond it. His voice carries the weight of everything he lost, and yet, somehow, it also carries the gentle flicker of everything he found. Love, memory, hope, a promise made in a quiet room, a vow kept through music. The two moments that broke him forever didn't silence him. They reshaped him. They turned his story into something deeper than fame or nostalgia. They turned it into a reminder that even the greatest voices tremble, and even legends break in ways the world never sees. And maybe that's why when Steve Perry sings today, people still stop and listen. Because beneath every note is a man who loved deeply, lost painfully, and carried both truths for the rest of his life. Some hearts don't just break once. Some hearts break twice.